The economy is on the verge of another mega depression. Hyperinflation on the way. Everything from lumber to chlorine is through the roof. Quietly and in passing, not even on the news. Debt 28 trillion, running debt increase 2 trillion year on year, US money printing 3 trillion year on year. Declining value 49% year on year. The US dollar is even as bad as the Bolivar. We are in multiple bubbles. Around the world, factories have gone offline, schools have been suspended, and entire cities have been locked down. The global economy is going down like the Titanic. This is now about the economy. The world economy is not slowing down. It has literally come to a screeching halt. Supply disruptions are already occurring at the ground level. Almost 75% of companies have reported supply chain disruptions, according to a new survey released by the Institute for Supply Management. The real exposure is companies with no real assets to weather this storm. So much debt, so much just-in-time cash flow. Companies that have been around for decades but can't survive few months of revenue interruption. Tourism industry worldwide collapsing. With countries issuing travel advisories, airlines canceling flights, and popular tourist destinations being put on high alert, people are avoiding crowds, airports, and travel in general. Museums and archaeological sites are closed, events are cancelled. There are going to be massive implications to the economy with things like travel, airlines, gasoline sales, even real estate with spring home buying season ramping up. The housing market is next. The Fed repo goes nuts every day. Trillions in derivative contracts, and every time you see wild swings happening, which is every day, you can think that these contracts are being activated. Think of it like fire insurance, and 1% of all homes burn on a given night. A very small percentage, but enough total loss to collapse all fire insurance companies. A market crash means the banks and pension funds will crash as well. A lot of companies will go under as well. The Dow companies, after depleting their cash on stock buyback, will seek handout assistance from the taxpayer. We never really recovered from the recession. Banker bailouts at taxpayer expense, coupled with QE propping up the economy. All that coupled with trillions in unfunded liabilities. Something's gotta give. Issues that have been stored up for years and years and years have been triggered by the virus and everything else. But it's back to those fundamental questions about too much debt, right? The fact that it's not an affordable way of dealing with the issues, and all the consequences of all that debt are just not being taken into account. The central banks around the world are printing confetti to oblivion. The biggest concern is the ballooning deficit and subsequent debt, coupled with the reality that with interest rates as low as they are, and the Fed holding over $4.3 trillion in debt, that should the economy falter, nobody has the necessary maneuvering room to actually do anything about it. Short of devaluing the dollar to ridiculous levels that would only serve to increase energy costs. And no, we're not energy independent, so another era devaluation of 45% would likely quadruple gas at the pump prices once again, crippling the economy at a time we could least afford it. Indicators? The lack of ability and effective Federal Bank reserve policy to fix the problem. The problem? Increased debt is necessary to keep the overall growth continuing. If everything is a bubble and we create new bubbles to get out of it, then how can we be wrong to say that another depression is on its way? Europe is in shambles, and now Asia is beginning to go the same way. The problem is not the pandemic or the supply lines. The real problem is debt, mountains, and mountains of debt. The building of an entire economy on money that is not really there. This isn't rocket science. As long as supply lines with China are shut down, nothing except the infusion of phony money will hold the market up, and so far, it's not working. They are not going to let it drop vertically, even though ultimately, it is going down. This is a controlled demolition, so either sit it out and wait patiently for the bottom, or try to time the market and take advantage of the volatility. No one alive has experienced the magnitude of this disaster unfolding. Get what you can out of the market and scram while you can. I think we're setting up for a massacre, all-out panic, multiple market halts, and breaks, capitulation selling. The American economy is collapsing. The worst depression in history is just around the corner, once the rest of the world realizes that the US dollar is worthless. The day of reckoning approaches. Most of these businesses have their doors still open only because they do not pay rent. Once they get evicted, they cannot pay their suppliers and employees, and the chain reactions begin. Meanwhile, Robinhood traders clicking their mouse and popping antidepressants like they were tic-tacs, continue to buy their lottery ticket shares. The chaos will not be a sudden meteoric event. Instead, it will be a gradual and insidious process. The poor dumb American will be bankrupted and evicted in a controlled process. At least that's what the globalists have planned. But, by the very definition of chaos, this will not be predictable by any means. We must rationalize the pandemic's aftermath in a thoughtful and mature way. Rashness and impulsiveness will not serve the cause of righteousness. Listen to what your conscience tells you. Follow its proddings, for that is the voice of God. Do not succumb to any relief initiatives given by the government. Investors aren't at the controls of the markets, the Federal Reserve is. We saw this same thing happen in 2008, yet nobody's prepared yet again. Nobody could have seen this coming. Anyone losing money right now has few excuses. Just simply viewing the bear, bull trends should have signaled to everyone that we were overdue, and they should have taken their gains a while ago and cared less about squeezing every last dollar out of the markets. The market can, and probably will keep heading up, as the US economy is dead in the water and the US dollar keep losing value. When things recover, it'll be like a train starting in bits and bursts. And more good news, our federal budget deficit so far through only the first 4 months of this fiscal period is a whopping $572 billion. Or to put it another way, $0.6 trillion. But I estimate that soon, our $1 trillion annual budget deficits will end up becoming $3 to $4 trillion deficits as our economy continues to implode. The government can't take in revenue on capital losses and negative earnings, and people who will eventually be out of work won't be paying payroll taxes, but will instead be getting unemployment checks. This economy is toast. This will hit home when layoffs start. 401k investments from paychecks stop. Unable to pay bills. People living paycheck to paycheck find empty store shelves. Tourist travel come to screeching halt. Kids wanting to help elderly parents but know if they do they get it then to their kids. It will be unmanageable. You can think of many more connections of despair. Welcome to the moment where the curtain is pulled on the wizard. Now even the sheeple will learn their government is at best incompetent or, at worst, their prison guards. The banksters and other masters of the universe know nothing but to steal. The entire notion of Western democracy superiority is a hoax. Our obese Western democracies based on lazy, infantile, self-centered people do not have the courage or fortitude for any battle. Superior armaments will be defeated by a little virus. This is not over. It is just starting. The pandemic is the catalyst for a global economic reset long overdue. Recovery? How about prepare for permanent liquidation? This is the big one. The 10,000-year event. A bubble so gargantuan it takes the entire West down. And with the new Biden's business taxes on the largest corporations, it is the employees who will eventually feel the pain. Research shows that corporate tax increases are mostly passed on to workers in the form of fewer jobs and lower wages. The proposed corporate tax rate of 28% would put the United States among the highest of developed nations, which would push businesses and jobs overseas. This will eventually extract wealth from the working class, to be delivered to the wealthy class and the corporations. That is what they are designed to do. A report by the Tax Foundation concluded that the increased corporate tax rate will cost 159,000 full-time jobs and trigger a 0.7% wage reduction, eventually resulting in economic contraction and the loss of jobs, as the working class struggles to repay the national debt necessitated by the government borrowing required to make up the revenue shortage. Biden's tax proposal would be a disaster for small businesses, minorities and low-skilled workers. Cognitive dissonance occurs when a person holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values, or participates in an action that goes against one of these three, and experiences psychological stress because of that. According to this theory, when two actions or ideas are not psychologically consistent with each other, people will do all in their power to change them until they become consistent. The discomfort is triggered by the person's belief clashing with new evidence, facts, perceived, wherein they will try to find a way to resolve the contradiction to reduce their discomfort. Normalcy bias is a belief people hold when there is a possibility of a disaster. It causes people to underestimate both the likelihood of a disaster and its possible effects because people believe that things will always function the way things normally have functioned. This may result in situations where people fail to adequately prepare themselves for disasters, and on a larger scale, the failure of governments to include the populace in its disaster preparations. About 70% of people reportedly display normalcy bias in disasters. Over the past few years, the U.S. government has been drilling and prepping for urban pacification, including arming many branches of various agencies. Millions of rounds of hollow-point bullets, massive food storage programs, reams of executive orders, and continuity of government programs in place. What do you think they were expecting? This situation would be a perfect out for the power that be and the banks to reset the unsustainable financial system. After all, who is to blame for such an act of God? Or so they could claim. The perfect black swan.